They got to hear that combination of the two languages. And I know it was really nice how she was making the story very interesting and emphasizing her words in the different languages. And I actually found that very amusing myself.
So one thing that I noticed was that it was more English focused, and students get to use the same vocabulary they've been developing through different activities throughout the unit, and then they transfer that to a completely different resource, which was a literature reading, the reading of the Hungry Caterpillar, and then go on to do another activity. But it transferred from one subject to the next one with the same vocabulary, basically.
Mm-hmm. And if you were a two-teacher model, that could have been your partner teacher doing it. So that extension activity might be something you kind of hand off, and the other teacher gets the opportunity to do that, how it fits into their schedule and with their students. And I also just want to draw your attention to how she used the different language domains. So first, students were listening and doing the gestures, and a lot of the gestures were the same. And then they went into a little bit of dictating and reading. And then the students practiced, they had little sentence prompts of my favorite part of the story. And then that went into the final part of writing, where they wrote what their favorite part of the story was and illustrated it. So it was thoughtful in making sure that all parts of the language were used, all domains of language. But it wasn't what I really like about the example is it wasn't some very big project or takeaway. It was, it was basically a read aloud. Oh, thanks, Google. It wasn't it wasn't anything big. It was basically a read aloud with gestures, so active listening. And then the students had some time to talk, process, and write. And that's it. That's the end of that extension activity. And now they're on to the next thing. So it doesn't have to be a big piece or additive thing that you're doing. It's really just kind of a chance and an opportunity to students to give some meaning and purpose behind that transfer and to help ingrain and really learn and use it purposefully. For extension activities, they have a little more information on page 144 in Teaching for Biliteracy. And if you have your book, I'd encourage you to turn to page 144, because I really love the example that they give pictured, and it kind of speaks to what Denise just said about the transfer between subjects too. So in this example, they have they were doing a science unit with literacy in Spanish that was all about worms, and then they transferred it into English during the bridge. And then for their extension activity, they had the students just kind of summarize orally, and they wrote in English what they learned about worms. But then they also did an extension activity, which I could really see kind of working in what we do, where they use that same vocabulary in English to then do some math story problems with worms. So talking about like the segments of a worm. And I like that they transfer that where it could be totally into another content area with a different teacher, but the idea is that you're just still using some of the same word choices and language. And how easy is it to write your own word problems using almost any content, any nouns that you're doing in another subject. So just that idea of how
we lost your sound again.
Yes.
we can find more examples of these later, but they call out in the book on page 146 some things to expect when you're seeing students transfer some of their Spanish literacy skills into English writing. So they give some examples of very common approximations that students make when they're trying to sound out to spell words in English, but they're using Spanish linguistic skills and backgrounds to do that. So it's a nice chart there. So to summarize, that is, and then that takes us to the end of our booth. That's the end of our unit. So reflection, and we don't have to go with these exact questions, but things that have really stood out or takeaways from today, things that you might still have questions about, and what is lingering in your mind. I do have one last slide that's kind of some next steps. So this isn't completely the end, but I just wanted to pause for some processing.
I have a question about science.
Yes.
Would it be possible to work with OSPI to get within each grade the kit that goes more with what they're talking about on the other side?
So trying to pair it with literacy more?
Well, with like I don't know what the Spanish version of Wonders does, but I know on the English side, there's a whole unit where it's a lot about trees and apples and yada yada. And if we could do the plant unit during that, rather than at a later time. I mean, just as much as possible, line it up, just so,
yeah, Yeah, we can look at the possibility of doing that. Okay, so you can keep reflecting, and if things come up, but just to kind of talk to our next steps, and that might, stimulate some more things to come out. So first of all, just breathe. This now just about 5 hours we spent together, talking through these different concepts and the idea of teaching for biliteracy and differences in dual language education, are meant to help put a lot of us kind of on the same page, just with having the same background and the same understanding of how teaching bilingual students might look, and some different strategies and things to consider in planning. But these are, like I mentioned before, these are long-term goals. In starting a new program.
Sound again. Can't hear you.
We learn about our students and how we want to change. So have a growth mindset for yourself, and there is no expectation that you are going to have to be doing a BOOF or biliteracy unit framework to start out your year, or that you have to do a bridge every 6 weeks or anything like that. This is part of the process of learning and trying, and we'll get better as we go. And as you might have heard, I shared with Annabelle, it's really exciting that we are getting to a point where this team in our dual immersion and Spanish immersion, teachers and staff in Bremerton School District are growing in a larger group to really have a
PLC that we can share about things that we're doing at different grade levels or different extension activities or different ideas for bridges more than we could before, and that we can team between schools and between grade levels. So it's really exciting, but it's, it takes time, and that's okay. Just like our students, we expect it's going to take a long time for them to really develop and master their two languages. It's going to take time for us to develop and to master our dual language program, even though we've been doing it for over a decade now, and it takes new shapes and new forms. Kind of the next step after you breathe, if you haven't already, please, I just encourage you to go through this more. And it might not be that you are reading it all the way through once, but skim through, especially if you still have questions. I try to share as much information as I could, but this is really such a wealth of knowledge and research and strategies and practice and notes from actual application. The two writers were dual language teachers for decades before they got into research and then into writing a book, and now in helping to coach other districts like us. So please go through, make notes for yourself. And then, as we revisit this later in the year, and then as we start to go back to our classrooms and do this, please, keep going back to here, because it is a wonderful resource to have. And then also on that book kind of thing, look for our next dual or Spanish immersion book study meeting. We have been reading through Thomas and Collier, and we had a study and a plan that we would be finishing up this month, but I believe on the 24th. But I don't know if that's still going to happen with everything that's been going on. So I will reach out to that team, which you're all included on that invitation, about when we can get together and kind of finish up our book study of Thomas and Collier and research. But my hope would be that we continue to meet as a PLC, as a learning community, so that these ideas, these questions, these things that we're learning, we can just share our own linguistic repertoire and our own experiences and just help each other to be built up. And then I would encourage you to visit teachingforbiliteracy.com and explore the resources and materials available there. There are some resources from that website, including some sample biliteracy unit frameworks that I put into our resource folder that you have access to, and I will make sure I share out again in our follow-up email. But if you go to their website, and I will just show you, if you go to teachingforbiliteracy.com, they have more videos of teaching demonstrations on there. They have a blog about what to expect that their teachers have written. They have more resources and handouts and things like that, even a cognate guide, which is nice. And then you can access all of this for free, but you just have to sign up. They ask that you create an account. And so I used my Bremerton School District email, and I created an account. And then that's how I have access to everything on their website, and they encourage you to use that. And then on that same kind of idea, I don't know what professional learning is going to look like this summer. We're hoping to have a team of 5 or 6 of us that go to Chicago for the Teaching for Biliteracy Institute in June, but I don't know if that is still happening with everything right now. I don't know what in-person professional development will look like, but staying tuned, and if you're interested, let me know, because I will continue to share things, and if not this, we'll hopefully keep doing more so that we can keep our learning together. And then last but not least, start discussing with your team. If you have lingering questions or ideas that you're thinking about, now is a great time to reach out and start kind of thinking about next year. Of course, we still are present for our current students as we do our distance learning, but starting to formulate, well, how will this work? What do we want the bridge to look like? Do we want to do it together or break up? How do we decide what oracy words we focus on? And how can we try to align our kits so that it makes sense with the literature that's happening? So that is my next steps. And that is the end of everything I have ready. Thank you so much for being on here for 3 hours. I think that is
a big reason to celebrate and to thank you for sticking through that long. It's a long time to sit on a computer. And then I will still be here. So if you have any other thoughts, questions, please feel free to ask or share.